Run Seat Smart, they're from it's the 3R Group Programs Marketing Manager. So you can give your car seat a second life there. Wonderful to have your company. I guess there's been two topics today that you really did respond to. One is phobias. Just the amount of phobias. I'm just astonished how many there are. Balloons. I hate buttons. When denim jeans got a zip fly rather than button flies, I said, thank God. Went off buttons as a 6-year-old when I played board games with my older sister's Twiddlywinks, I think. A proper Tiddlywinks thing was missing and I was always given a shirt button to use. I've never forgotten it.
Oh no.
My phobia is metal underwater. I vomited during the Titanic movie when I saw water pouring into its hull. And on that note...
Don't go and see The Exorcist then.
No, leave that alone.
God.
It's been a wonderful Monday with you both. Lana, great to have you on again. Kia ora,
Thank you very much, Wallace.
Yeah. And Alan Blackman, thank you. I am
Cool.
Wallace Chapman, Simon Wilson and Ruth Money on Tuesday at panel. That's 3:45 tomorrow. Checkpoint with Lisa Owen is next.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akine, the death toll continues to rise in what Israel is calling its 9/11. And the fate of hostages snatched by armed Hamas militants is still unknown. We'll have the latest on the war in the Middle East and talk to a New Zealander in Tel Aviv. Back here, is National serious about an election do-over, or is it just scaremongering? We talk to a former Prime Minister who knows how to do a deal with Winston Peters. It's haere rā to Australia as teams book their place in the Rugby World Cup quarter-finals. And for all you squares out there, we have the ultimate guide to cutting up a gooey custard slice without it self-destructing. Apparently, it is a thing. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. Fears of a wider conflict in the Middle East are growing. The death toll from Hamas-Israel clashes now stands over 1,100. It comes as Israel pounded the Palestinian enclave of Gaza in retaliation for one of the bloodiest attacks in its history. World Watch's Andrew McRae reports.
Global oil prices have been driven up by the Hamas assault on Israel, with Brent crude up nearly 5%. Meanwhile, an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council has ended in New York without a unified statement on the unfolding violence in the Middle East. Israel says more than 260 bodies have been found at the site of a music festival that had been taking place close to the border with Gaza. Some festival goers are thought to have been among the 100 hostages taken. In response, Israeli airstrikes have killed more than 400 people.
Police are undertaking regular patrols past synagogues across New Zealand. They say they're monitoring the local situation in case there are any repercussions. Meanwhile, a man in Auckland who has family living in Israel says what he's being told about the killings is gut-wrenching. Ben Oren says a member of his extended family has been killed during the fighting.
So I think it's just caught a lot of people off guard, and they're just, trying to look out for each other. But some of the videos, that we're seeing and some of the messages that I've been receiving from people, it's just pretty horrific, with all the kidnapping of just civilians and just brutal all round, really.
In other news, the National Party denies it's irresponsible to be talking about the prospect of a second election when most New Zealanders haven't even voted yet, facing questions for the second day in a row. Leader Chris Luxon says he just wants to highlight the degree of uncertainty around MMP and the possible election result. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
National dropped a strategic bombshell over the weekend, flagging a growing possibility it could fail to cut a post-election deal if it has to rely on both ACT and New Zealand First. Chris Luxon says while unlikely, that could mean a second election. Labour says this talk just further demonstrates the chaos and instability a national government could bring. David Seymour says ACT and National could work constructively, akin to a political marriage. He also defended once again talking about ACT agreeing to a confidence-only deal, but says that's a last resort option.
A by-election will be held in the Port Waikato electorate following the death of the ACT Party's candidate. ACT is mourning the death of Neil Christensen, who was the party's 35th ranked candidate. The Electoral Commission says party votes in the electorate will be counted in the general election results, but electorate votes won't count. The date of the subsequent by-election will be set by the Prime Minister. The 80-year-old man accused of murdering his wife in a Mount Maunganui retirement village last night can now be named. John Alfred Salter appeared in Tauranga District Court this afternoon, charged with the murder of Jean Salter, who was 78 years old. He entered no plea and was remanded in custody. Operator MetLife Care says it is an extremely sad incident. The jury has retired this afternoon to make its decision in the second trial of Christchurch man David Benbow. Mr Benbow is accused of murdering his childhood friend, Michael McGrath, who hasn't been seen since May 2017. And a 24-hour strike by telehealth workers has just ended with no new talks planned. The National Telehealth Service, Whakarongoro, which operates more than 35 services, including Healthline and mental health crisis support, says most were able to operate during the strike, but with reduced capacity. Te Whatu Order says it boosted staffing at emergency department and acute mental health teams during the strike. In sport, Black Caps coach Gary Stead is touting a scrap with the Netherlands in their second Cricket World Cup game in Hyderabad tonight. The Black Caps are coming off a big win over England, while the Dutch were beaten by Pakistan. New Zealand have won all 4 of their previous ODIs against the Netherlands, but Stead knows the tournament minnows are capable of causing an upset.
They're a team that'll scrap, that we know they've brought in a few players from the county scene. They're a team that I think won't go away, so they're up for every game that they play, and we have to be ready to play again the style of play that we want to play throughout this tournament.
Fiji have snuck into the Rugby World Cup quarterfinals despite a 24-23 loss to Portugal. Fiji needed a point to progress to the knockout phase and managed that with a bonus point for losing by less than 8 to set up a last 8 clash with England. It was Portugal's first win at a World Cup. New Zealand basketballer Stephen Adams has returned to the court after a long injury layoff. Adams suffered a knee injury in January, which sidelined him at the end of the last NBA season with the Memphis Grizzlies. Today he spent 12 minutes on court in a pre-season game against the Indiana Pacers. Meanwhile, the New Zealand Breakers will also be involved in the American pre-season when they play against the Portland Trailblazers and Utah Jazz this week. And New Zealand golfer Stephen Alker has finished second at the latest Champions Tour event in the US. That's the news.
With less than a week to go until the election, Morning Report is speaking live to the Labour and National Party leaders.
How are police going to identify who the gang members are if you've taken their gang patches off them?
In Australia, the gangs actually are reacting to the laws that we want to introduce by forming their own political party. In this case, they just have to vote for Labour, and that's what they're doing.
You can hear me, Ingrid Hipkiss, speak to Labour's leader Chris Hipkins this morning in an extended interview straight after the 7 o'clock news. That's here on Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. In the west, from Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel Peninsula and Taihape. Cloudy periods, a few showers north of Waikato, spreading elsewhere this afternoon. For Bay of Plenty and Taupo, fine weather. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Horowhenua to Wellington, mainly fine today. Showers developing tomorrow afternoon and evening, some possibly heavy. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today. Isolated showers developing tomorrow afternoon, becoming widespread and possibly heavy in Canterbury and Marlborough. Bulla and Westland, a few showers, clearing southern Westland early tomorrow morning and elsewhere in the afternoon. North and central Otago and Queenstown Lakes, fine, but a few showers for Queenstown Lakes this evening. Areas of frost tomorrow morning. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, showers becoming isolated tomorrow evening. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, showers developing tomorrow morning. morning. It is 7 minutes past 5. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 5:20.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. More than 700 Israelis have been killed in the brutal and bloody war, which Israel is describing as its 9/11. Gaza is being pounded by airstrikes in retaliation for the surprise and well-coordinated attack on Israel. Civilians from several countries have been taken hostage by the armed group Hamas and transferred to Gaza. Among the dead are at least 250 people attending a music festival near the Gaza border. Rocket attacks and gun battles are continuing, and at least 400 Palestinians have been killed. The US is leading the calls for condemnation of the Hamas attack, and the Israeli flag is being displayed on all UK government buildings. The BBC's Jonathan Beale has the latest.
Israeli troops are still hunting down armed Palestinians. More than 30 hours after their biggest and bloodiest breakout from Gaza into Israel itself. One of the world's most advanced militaries, taken by surprise by Hamas, a militant group kept behind barriers that were supposed to stop this happening. Their attack as brutal as it was brazen. Hundreds killed. For Israel, that's included scores of unarmed civilians as well as soldiers. Already the largest loss of life in decades. Here, the bodies of an Israeli family shot dead, waiting to be identified and buried. Hamas has taken dozens of hostages too, like this 85-year-old grandmother, Yafa Adar, whisked away by militants in a golf cart. Families too, among them Yoni's wife and their 5- and 2-year-old daughters. He's left anxiously waiting for news and pleading for their safe return.
I want to ask of Hamas, don't hurt them. Don't hurt little children, don't hurt women. If you want me instead, I'm willing to come.
Israel's Prime Minister, meeting security chiefs this morning, has warned his nation of a long and difficult war ahead. Both sides have already suffered significant losses.
Hamas murdered hundreds of Israelis, men, women and children, and took dozens hostage into Gaza. This horrific terror act demands a forceful, determined and sustained response.
Israel's response has been swift and harsh. Despite the massive intelligence failure, its missiles filmed by our BBC team in Gaza. Jets have been hitting what they say are Hamas positions, but many civilians have also been killed in this densely populated Palestinian enclave, blockaded and nowhere else to flee.
Tonight, this is as close as we can get to Gaza itself, about 5 kilometres in that direction. There is a lot of military activity, jets overhead. Israel has told its citizens living nearby to leave. It's not clear whether that could signal a land incursion by Israel into Gaza itself. But inevitably, this will end up being more bloody still.
There's also the risk of escalation. Hezbollah has been firing rockets into Israel from neighbouring Lebanon. They say a show of solidarity with Palestinians. This region has long been a tinderbox. And once again, the flames are being fanned.
That was the BBC's Jonathan Beale, and we'll have more on that story shortly. It is 11 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. As the campaign hurtles towards the end, the prospect of a hung parliament or even a second election dominated talk out on the road today for party leaders. Over the weekend, National flagged the growing possibility it could fail to cut a post-election deal if it has to rely on both ACT and New Zealand First. Labour leader Chris Hipkins told reporters in Auckland today it was irresponsible and scaremongering.
I think a National Act New Zealand First coalition would be unstable, they'd be unable to agree on anything. And in fact, the idea of a National Act coalition now seems to be in complete turmoil as well, with David Seymour saying that unless Christopher Luxon agrees with everything that he wants, that he's actually not going to form a coalition with them.
And for the second day running, leader Chris Luxon defended National's approach.
I think it's pretty unlikely there'll be a second election, but I think the reality is there's a whole bunch of uncertainty and a whole bunch of uncertain outcomes that come with MMP elections. And so our message has been consistent. Party vote National. If you want to change this government, a guaranteed change,
You're deliberately trying to scare the New Zealand public to not vote Winston. Is that what you're doing?
We're saying it very clearly to the New Zealand public. We want you to party vote National so we can change this government.
And our political editor, Jane Patterson, joins us now. OK, Jane, what is National doing here?
This was a strategic decision by National over the weekend. Campaign chair Chris Bishop raising the prospect of a hung parliament where neither the left nor the right bloc could form a government. And he said that could lead to a second election, potentially New Zealand having to go back to the polls. Now, the idea behind it is saying, please vote for National to make sure that you actually put us in a position where we can form a government after the election. But I don't know how well it's playing. It sounds panicked. It sounds desperate in terms of raising these prospects of uncertainty and of instability. Remember, this was a decision that National leader Chris Luxon made to keep New Zealand First and Winston Peters in the mix. And now he's saying, well, I don't know if I'm necessarily going to be able to handle that mix if that's what it comes down to. So as you heard there, Labour making the most of it, going on the attack, saying this just sort of shows, even before we've got to the polls, that the potential for chaos and uncertainty. We also had ACT Report and Politic today talking about David Seymour once again raising the prospect of that confidence-only agreement where he could give National confidence and then negotiate for everything else. He was asked about that today. He actually said, look, National and ACT could work very, very closely together. He's trying to present a very constructive approach. He said they would have a relationship akin to a political marriage and said that the talk of the confidence option is on the table, but he describes it as a last resort option.
Are we getting mixed messages here? Because Christopher Luxon has said he can work with anyone on the one hand, and then we've got this raised. And is he at odds with Chris Bishop on the possibility of a second election?
No, I think they're both talking about the same thing, maybe using less strong language than Chris Bishop did over the weekend. When he was asked about it yesterday, Chris Luxon didn't go into those specifics, but he certainly didn't back away from what Chris Bishop had talked about. And then, as you heard in that audio there today, he said although it's pretty unlikely, they're still talking up the chance of a second election. So, as I said, a strategic choice. Not sure how well it's playing for them. I think they're probably getting a bit worried about seeing potentially ACT and National's votes slipping away. Labour is talking up its momentum and getting a bit of momentum back in the polls, and New Zealand First coming up.
OK, so in terms of Christopher Luxon, is he expressing any regret about his video leaving the door open to Winston Peters?
No, he's not. So they are sticking with that, although, there's no regret in doing it, but you can certainly hear that he does not want to work with Winston Peters. He keeps saying that very, very clearly. What they may be regretting is not actually ruling Winston Peters and New Zealand First out much earlier in the game, maybe back at the start of the year. That might be what they're regretting, but they have made that decision and now they are stuck with that decision and what that brings in terms of the election result.
How's this all going to play with Winston Peters? Because we know he's got a long memory, right?
He will be watching this campaign very, very carefully. He'll be listening to whatever people are saying, and he's also taking an interesting approach. He's been very, very careful to make sure that he is not presenting himself as an agent of chaos. In the debates, you've seen him take a very constructive approach, saying, we will be the adults in the room.
With their pants on.
With their long pants on. We will shake hands and we will sit around the negotiating table. And in fact, he said on Morning Report this morning, he said it doesn't matter what people say in the election, it matters when you get around the table. So I think he's very much trying to dissipate any idea that he's the genesis of any of this. And he is saying, I am the experienced one. I will be able to get round and work with whoever the election result delivers. And he and David Seymour both make the point too. The voters are the one that will deliver the result, and then it's up to the parties to actually deal with it as they go, as opposed to this, I suppose, predicting what might happen and predicting the problems that might occur.
I imagine it could be quite a punishing experience for the parties that force the New Zealand government, New Zealand people back to the polls again, if that were to happen, in terms of the support they may or may not get the second time round.
Well,
if there was a second time
we've
round.
talked about this already, about the connection to people, the disillusionment, and just the feeling that people are sort of over this election already, let alone going to a second round. I asked Chris Hipkins today, is this the point where we start talking about a grand coalition? I mean, is that an option? And that was ruled out by him. He said there just aren't values. It would be not pointless, they weren't his words, but he said an election is a contest of ideas. So if you just end up amalgamating everybody, it doesn't sort of do what the voters say. So that's another option off the table, which was never realistic. But as we've seen, there are all sorts of different proposals now being thrown around.
And the other thing that has happened, the sad news that one of the candidates in the Port Waikato electorate has died. This is the ACT candidate, Neil Christensen. What does that mean?
That's right, a really sad event, obviously, in the middle of an election campaign, but it's created a very different political situation this close because, of course, all of the party lists and the electorate candidates are all locked in for this election. So what's going to happen is that an extra seat will be added through the list for the election, because when the party vote comes in, they have to divide it up amongst the 120. And then the Port Waikato a by-election will be held, a date yet to be determined, and then that will become an extra seat after that by-election is held. So the next parliament will have 121 seats. But the Electoral Commission says for Port Waikato voters, please still go out and vote because their party vote will be counted, but their electorate vote won't. They will have a chance to vote for their electorate MP in that by-election. But go out and vote. If you're in Port Waikato, your party vote will still be recorded.
Thank you, Jane. That is our political editor, Jane Patterson. Now, returning to our top story, at least 1,100 people have been killed, tens of thousands have been displaced as rocket attacks and gun battles continue in Israel and Gaza. Joining us now for more is CNN's Nada Bashir. Nada, what is the latest around casualties and what is happening there?
Well, look, as you mentioned there, the death toll is steadily rising in both Israel and Gaza. And overnight, we have seen continued exchange of rocket fire and strikes in Gaza. We've heard from the Israeli ambassador to the US saying that thousands of rockets have been fired from Gaza into Israel. And what we've been hearing from our teams on the ground in southern Israel is that we have seen continued gun battles between Israeli defense forces and Hamas fighters in southern Israel. Now, of course, the priority at this stage for Israel is on trying to secure those border areas to, in their words, neutralize Hamas fighters who have infiltrated into Israeli territory. That is set to be the first phase, if you like, of this response to this unprecedented attack by Hamas. But there will be a second phase. We've heard that from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and that is set to really be a very much ramped up military response by Israel. They are said to be preparing their offensive positions at this stage. It's unclear, though, of course, what we can expect, but it is anticipated that this could well be a ground incursion into Gaza. It does appear to be a question of when, not if, at this point in time.
Nada, what is known of the hostages that have been taken?
Well, look, at this stage, we've heard from Hamas. They claim to be holding over 100 hostages in Gaza. That's according to the deputy chief of Hamas's political bureau. But authorities in Israel haven't at this stage confirmed the precise number, but they have said that they believe dozens aren't being held. And of course, we have seen those videos of people being captured by Hamas fighters on the ground in Israel, being taken into Gaza. We've heard from some of the families of those who are taken hostage, speaking about the immense worry that they have now, having lost contact with some of them, speaking to their children at the point of being met by Hamas fighters and gunfire, and then, of course, losing touch with them. Now, we have been looking at video here at CNN, and according to some video that has been obtained and geolocated by CNN, at least 4 civilians in Be'eri, which is about 3 miles from the border with Gaza, were killed while in the custody of Hamas, just feet after being escorted by them. So, of course, this is a huge concern. But the other concern is, as strikes continue in Gaza, it is anticipated that some of these hostages could fall victim in the crossfire. As we know, Gaza is a tiny enclave. It has been under blockade since 2007, enforced by Israel. It is densely populated, and the fact that there are Israeli citizens, hostages being held captive in Gaza is a huge concern. Many have suggested that a ground presence by Israel would be necessary in order to extricate these hostages. And of course, as we've seen in the past with these military operations on Gaza, the airstrikes on Gaza by Israel, there is a huge civilian toll. And so, of course, there will be concern within the Israeli government, within the Israeli population around the safety of these hostages, both in terms of their fate at the hands of Hamas, but also the potential to be caught in the crossfire.
Thank you for the update, Nada. That is Nada Bashi, CNN's international correspondent there. 23 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Do get in touch. Let us know your thoughts on, well, the threat, prospect, don't know quite what to call it, of a redo of the election if there's a hung parliament, or the parties can't make a coalition agreement. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpoint@rnz, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Evie is here. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Prime Minister Chris Hipkins says New Zealand is ready to assist any international humanitarian response to Hamas militants' surprise attack on Israeli territory at the weekend. More than 1,100 people have died since Saturday's assault began, including at least 260 at an Israeli music festival close to the border with Gaza. There are almost 200 New Zealanders registered in Israel or Palestinian territories, and Mr Hipkins says there are no reports of any of them being caught up in the conflict. Police here say they are undertaking regular patrols past synagogues in case of repercussions. National says it's not irresponsible to raise the possibility of a second election when most people have yet to vote in the first. Christopher Luxon says while another election is an unlikely prospect, MMP elections can be very close, and a rerun could be needed if National finds itself needing New Zealand First to govern after Saturday but can't make a deal. Labour says it's scaremongering. Meanwhile, the ACT Party's candidate in the Port Waikato electorate, Neil Christensen, has died. The Electoral Commission says party votes will be counted in the general election results, but electorate votes will not, and a by-election will follow. And Massey University is set for an annual loss of more than $53 million, but isn't saying how it's come about. The figure is contained in documents obtained by RNZ outlining proposals to slash jobs and courses at the university's College of Science. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, nothing to report on the roads in our main centres at the moment. Our next traffic news and headlines are at 20 to 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. The Rugby World Cup quarter-finalists have been found, with Fiji the last team to lock in a spot in the final 8 today. Despite a shock 1-point loss to Portugal in their last pool match, Fiji are through, and the Wallabies are heading home before the knockout stage for the first time. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. OK, Felicity, what a win for Portugal to finish the pool play stages at the tournament.
It was an exciting way to wrap up the pool play stages after a month of rugby in France. It was quite an unexpected result, but unless you're a Wallabies fan, you're probably quite happy with the outcome of this, because Fiji and Portugal actually both got what they wanted from it. Fiji are through to the quarterfinals, and Portugal get their first ever Rugby World Cup win. So to put this into context, Portugal are actually only at their second Rugby World Cup, 16 years after the first time they made an appearance at this tournament. And they've been playing some attacking style of rugby under their French coach, who's going to step down because he always planned to at the end of this tournament, so a great sign off for him. But he saw this as kind of getting them some new fans in the way that they were playing it, a little bit different to what we'd expect from a minnow nation. And they've come together and they it was a couple of weeks ago when they nearly had their first win. It was a draw with Georgia during pool play. And if you'd seen the sort of exasperated expressions or like a little bit of devastation when they'd come so close, for them to get this actually right now, the jubilation in the stands and on the pitch, it really wraps it up. They can head home and Portugal can really start to build on this rugby. Whereas Fiji, they will be a little bit disappointed to be wrapping up pool play with this. They got the bonus point that they needed by finishing within 8 points. But they probably thought that they were going to be finishing with a win heading into this quarterfinal against England. And their Fiji coach Simon Rawuli says they can't afford to dwell on the loss, but rather have to switch their minds to England.
To be in that top 8 in the world, to be competing there is huge for us. So we've got to obviously review what we've done pretty quickly, but we've got to be on to the next task pretty much straight away.
So there are some interesting matchups in this quarterfinals, but if we thought this tournament's been dragging on, we're not going to be watching any rugby until next Sunday and Monday, which is when Sunday we'll get the All Blacks against Ireland, and that's putting the All Blacks' fate back into the front of our minds at that point.
Let's switch to another World Cup, right? The Black Caps. They're going to face a couple of Kiwis tonight in their second Cricket World Cup game.
Yeah, so the Black Caps play the Netherlands in Hyderabad tonight, and so they could potentially come up against Logan van Beek and Max O'Dowd, two people born in New Zealand and who might be familiar to the people who follow domestic cricket within New Zealand. Van Beek is a bowler who has played for Canterbury and Wellington, but during the Netherlands' first World Cup game, he actually starred with the bat reasonably well and picked up 1 wicket. He is under a hamstring injury cloud, so may or may not get named in the team tonight. Max O'Dowd's an opening batter who failed to fire in their first game, so he'll be looking to get some runs on the board against some New Zealanders who he knows within this team. This game's being played at where the Netherlands play, at the stadium where the Netherlands played their first game. So it's the Black Caps that have actually had to travel to the other side to play this game. It's going to be considered a batter-friendly pitch, but the Black Caps will be without Kane Williamson for a second game at the World Cup. They're looking at likely that the bowlers Tim Southee and Lockie Ferguson will be making a comeback into the squad tonight. And I guess as well, it's, different conditions to be sitting on for this, but the Black Caps have had good dominance over the Netherlands previously. 4 ODIs, 4 wins. They've already had a win against England in their opening game, and the Netherlands had a loss against Pakistan. So maybe things stacked in the Black Caps' favour today, but as we've seen earlier, minnows at a World Cup, maybe don't underestimate them.
Could be another late night for you, Felicity. Thank you, Felicity Reid, their sports reporter. Returning to the campaign trail now, and National is sounding the alarm, warning a second election could be on the cards if forming a coalition government proves too difficult. Leader Christopher Luxon has said he will work with Winston Peters post-election if he has to. Current polling suggests that National and ACT will need New Zealand First to get over the line. But at the weekend, the party's campaign chair, Chris Bishop, raised what he described as the very real and growing possibility that Aotearoa might need an election redo if there's an even split on the left and right, or it is not possible to form a three-way coalition. Winston Peters claims the comments are a sign of panic and scaremongering, while former Prime Minister and National leader Jim Bolger knows how to get a deal done. Following a fractious relationship with Winston Peters, he's still managed to form the country's first MMP government with New Zealand First, and he joins us now. Kia ora, Jim.
Good afternoon.
What do you make of all this talk about a hung parliament? Is it legitimate conversation to have, or is it scaremongering?
I think filling in the gaps. I don't expect that to happen. I expect the leaders of the parties who are the majority after next Saturday's election to form the government, and no particular reason why they won't.
Well, potentially there are some difficult personalities involved and things have been said on the campaign trail. I mean, you did a deal after a pretty fractious lead up to the election. How?
Well, you talk to people, and I don't think the conditions are very difficult to form a deal. I mean, clearly people want a change in government. I think there's something in today's Dominion Post, well, it's called the Post now, I know, that about 90% of New Zealanders want a change. I mean, they think the cost of living is out of control, therefore need to change. And I just think the groundwork's all been done, or the work hasn't been done, and therefore the groundwork is there to form a new government. And I believe that's what will happen after Saturday.
So what is National's game, saying that potentially there'll be a redo after the election, warning people of the potential for a hung result?
Well, theoretically, they're right. There's always a potential for a hung result, but I don't expect it. I expect quite a comfortable win by the centre-right, and they should be getting their mind around the big issues they have to deal with, because really the economy is in bad shape. Debt is too high. We are spending too much, and that requires a strong government to address, and that's what we need to elect on Saturday.
So is this just a strategy then to say these things from Chris Bishop?
I'm not sure what Chris is working at, to be honest. I haven't been talking to Chris for a while. But he obviously decided it was important to put it out there. It may be to encourage a few more people to vote for National so they'll get a clearer majority. I don't know. But I don't anticipate a hung parliament at all.
What can you tell us about the specific idiosyncrasies of negotiating with Winston Peters when it comes to a coalition?
Or be awake. I mean, Winston is smart, he's experienced, and he will test the parameters of the discussion. I mean, the fact is he stayed with the team we put together. He never caused it to fall apart. So while we took a while to bring the coalition together, but once we were together, there were no particular issues.
When you say test the parameters, test the boundaries, how so?
Well, he'll test policy ideas or thinking, because he might have a slightly different one. And I don't have any objection to that. I think that's totally legit to test political ideas. You're bringing three parties together we're talking about now. They will all have nuances and subtleties in what they mean and what they don't mean, and what it might mean for the public at large. I mean, that's inevitable. It happens in every caucus every week. So nothing to be frightened of, but to be aware that you need to have your arguments well mustered. You need to have a clear idea as to what you intend to do and be able to explain that clearly, both to Winston, and particularly if we're talking about Winston Peters, but also to the caucus, but much more importantly to the country at large.
Can Winston Peters be trusted?
Yes, I believe so. It wasn't Winston Peters who destroyed the coalition government he was in with me at all. It was others who took that honour upon themselves.
Do you think that National is potentially making negotiations more difficult by some of the things that they're saying about Winston Peters during the course of the election campaign?
That's campaign, and, you know, people address those issues from their own perspective. But and when the votes are counted at the end of the week, the leaders of the parties have to look at the reality, look at who's got the votes, who can put a government together and get on with the job. That's what New Zealand wants them to do, is after the election to bring together the coalition necessary to form a strong and focused government and get on with it.
Have you cast your vote yet, Jim?
No, I normally cast it on election day, so that's
enjoy. Thank you so much for your
that.
time, Jim. Appreciate that. That is Jim Bolger, the former Prime Minister and National leader there, on doing coalition deals specifically with Winston Peters. 25 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tōne mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins me in the studio now. OK, Nona, we're talking about Fonterra. It's lifted its forecast milk payout. What's the reason for that?
Well, okay, so it's up 50 cents. That's at the midpoint range to $7.25. So it was at $6.75. And that was just recently when they announced their financial result. What they're saying now is that milk collection in New Zealand and perhaps elsewhere in the world is likely to be down with the El Nino effect. And also China is back in the market, so that's seeing the prices rise. So we're talking about perhaps some pressure on the supply at the same time. Additional demand, and that's the reason. They're saying that may not be it, so they're going to keep the market informed as the situation changes.
Okay, let's talk about a global equities research firm is warning investors to be cautious about investing. I mean, what are the details?
Yeah, so this is a company called Morningstar. It's a global firm, and they do research on the value, the underlying value of companies. So it's not a brokerage firm. They don't buy and sell stocks stocks as such, but they look at the value of companies. In these times, it's quite interesting to note that about 9% of our stocks are undervalued relative. So, like, say for example, you had a stock that was, market value that's based on the share price $1 million, but that company had, say, $2 million in cash. You would say that company's undervalued, right? Because they have more on their books than their actual value on the market. And what this company is saying is there's a lot of very good quality stocks on the market right now that are undervalued. However, that doesn't mean it's a good time to buy. The fellow that I spoke to is the head of equities for Morningstar. His name is Peter Warrens, and he's been around for a long time, since the 60s, he told me. And he said that anyone who thinks that interest rates are going to go back to where they were, post-GFC, is dreaming. That's not going to happen. The normal is about 4 to 6%. He said that's what people should get used to because that's what's normal. And he said if you are going to invest in stocks, he said what you should do is accumulate cash and wait for the bottom to come and then really fire off your guns. In the meantime, he says, if you're going to go fishing for stocks, this is his advice, fish close to the shore and in calm waters. Don't venture outside into the rough ones. In other words, be careful out there. There's a lot of volatility, and certainly we've been seeing that, for example, just today.
Okay, well, let's take a spin around the market.
All right, so we've got the NZX Top 50 Index that fell 0.75%, and that's an 82-point drop to 11,287. Not surprising, given the war breaking out in the Middle East. That's driven up oil prices. That's put the dollar under, the US dollar rather, with some pressure under to see maybe interest rates rise there. We saw over the weekend a ridiculous number in the jobless numbers. We were expecting, new jobs rather, we were expecting, I think, 170,000. We ended up with like over 300,000. This is all putting pressure on the US dollar. And so despite that, our dollar is trading at 59.7 US cents, 94 Australian and 48.9 British pence. It's going to be a heck of a ride this week, I'd say.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. That's Nona Peltier there with Business News. Returning to our top story, Israel has declared war on Hamas after it launched a brutal and highly coordinated surprise attack on Israel, taking hostages and killing civilians. More than 700 Israelis and 400 Palestinians are reported dead and many more injured, with Hamas claiming to be holding more than 100 hostages in Gaza, including Israeli army officers. The New Zealand government's designated the military wing of Hamas as a terrorist organisation. Jordan Grimmer is a Kiwi living in Israel and joins us now from Tel Aviv. Kia ora, Jordan. How has your night been?
Kia ora, Lisa. I have to say I didn't sleep wonderfully, but I managed to get some sleep, so that's good news.
Are there any particular rules, a curfew or a lockdown, or how are things operating?
So here in Tel Aviv, there isn't any official lockdown. Although when you go out into the streets, they've been absolutely deserted, mostly just a few people out there walking their dogs. And I think that is mostly because people are very scared of the rockets that have been hitting the city or have been reaching the city before being intercepted by the Iron Dome. People want to stay close to where they know there is a bomb shelter. And so when you're out in the streets, you're not sure where that will be.
Jordan, tell me what happens when you get an alert. Where do you go? What do you do?
So it depends on your building. Newer buildings have bomb shelters inside them, and so often everyone in an apartment building will run to the particular floor that has the shelter. My building itself doesn't have one. It's a very old building, so all of us have to run across the road into a community shelter. It's kind of it's an addiction treatment centre underground. It looks a bit like a church or community hall basement, and kind of all of us gather under there and wait until the explosions stop.
What is that like?
Oh, it's terrifying. It's not a fun experience at all. Often you'll be there with older people and young children and babies, so everyone kind of has to try and put on a brave face to keep everyone feeling calm in the situation. But it's not easy, and especially when it's happening late at night and everyone's wearing their pyjamas. Yeah.
And how much warning would you get?
So we get, when the sirens start, there is generally in Tel Aviv around 90 seconds to get to the shelter before you'll hear the explosions or the interceptions. So from my apartment, we can get underground in the shelter in about 60 seconds, but it depends on how far up you live in the building or how far away you live.
Jordan, I wonder what has been the reaction between your friends and people you talk to about the level of sophistication in this attack launched by Hamas?
Yeah, I think I would say that people here are feeling the whole range of negative and negative emotions. Firstly, just complete shock that something like this could happen. There's going to be, I think after the dust settles, there will have to be hard questions to be asked about how this could occur. But secondly, just absolute kind of disgust and shock, especially some of the footage that has been circulating on social media, people being massacred at music festivals, old women and young toddlers being taken hostage. It's been really galling, and just I don't even really have words to describe it. I mean, I think Saturday has had the largest number of Jewish people killed in one day since the Holocaust. And so that's been a psychic shock to the people here, that something like that could happen.
What kind of discussion is there publicly about the hostages and what Israel and other international countries, because there are many people from different countries who have been taken hostage, about what is going to happen with that situation?
I think the discussion has mostly just been, at this stage, it's very early, so it's mostly just been in support of the army helping to save the hostages. I think we don't know a huge amount apart from what's being seen in the media and social media, and so no one knows where the hostages specifically are or much about what conditions they're kept in, but people are desperate for their family to come home or to hear more about what their friends and family are doing, and so yeah, people are just really wanting that to happen, and so they're hoping the IDF and other supporters will help that happen, but we're just having to put our faith in that.
Jordan, obviously Israel is retaliating, and that may mean that more people are brought into service. Do you have concerns about reservists being called back? I understand your husband may be one of those.
Yes. So many people are being called up. I have a large number of friends and colleagues. I think around 10% of my workplace has already been called up on reserve duty. My husband hasn't received a call yet, but it's something that's on the cards. It's a very nervous feeling, knowing that this is a possibility. Obviously, if they're going to go rescue hostages, that's a good thing, but it's not something I ever expected in my life that I would be having to worry about my husband or a spouse going to war. So people are feeling really new emotions. They're feeling a lot of fear, even though that's mixed in with hope. People here are resilient and they're able to kind of cope with really difficult situations, but it's still very awful.
Jordan, I really appreciate you talking to us at what is an incredibly difficult time, I imagine. Thank you for that. That is Jordan Grimmer, who is a Kiwi who's living in Israel, and he was joining us there live from Tel Aviv. It is 5:45 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is time for the headlines. Anaya Iwi, mina pita pita kōrero.
The United States says it's sending immediate extra munitions to Israel after the weekend's surprise attack by Hamas militants. The death toll from the Hamas-Israel clashes now stands at over 1,100, and fears of a wider conflict in the Middle East are growing. Police say they're looking into alleged animal cruelty at Otago University, where students reportedly mistreated a live eel as part of an initiation ritual. The university is also looking at claims students had bitten the legs off ducks. It's yet to find any evidence of the alleged duck abuse. The 80-year-old man accused of murdering his wife in a Mount Maunganui retirement village last night has been named as John Alfred Salter. Mr Salter appeared in Tauranga District Court this afternoon, charged with the murder of 78-year-old Jean Salter. He entered no plea and was remanded in custody until November. In Christchurch, the jury in the trial of David Benbow, who's accused of murdering his childhood friend Michael McGrath, has retired. Mr McGrath hasn't been seen since May 2017. And in his summing up, Justice Jonathan Eaton told the jury one of the issues they have to determine is whether he is dead. And Te Whatu Order Southern has confirmed there are now 65 cases of the cryptosporidiosis gastrobug in Queenstown, with 18 probable cases and 26 under investigation. The most likely cause is traces of faeces in Lake Wakatipu, which was then processed through the 2 Mile water treatment plant. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic. Traffic seems to be moving as it usually does at 13 minutes to 6 on a Monday evening. Our next news and weather is 6 o'clock.
Thank you, Evie. National's doubling down on its claim there's a very real and growing possibility of a hung parliament, and that would mean going back to the polls. Christopher Luxon has defended the comments made at the weekend by the party's campaign chair and senior MP Chris Bishop, but now concedes it's unlikely. Bishop has said it could happen if they can't strike a three-way deal with parties to form a government. So what are the legal ins and outs? Well, joining us now is Otago University law professor Andrew Geddes. Kia ora, Andrew.
Yeah, kia ora.
Hey, let's start off with how long they've got to work it out. How long do they get to work out if they can form a government or not?
As long as a piece of string. There's no formal cut-off date to forming a government. The negotiations can carry on in law for as long as it takes. There is a requirement that Parliament meet 6 weeks after the election results are announced. But you can have Parliament meet without a government having formed and carry on thereafter. So the short answer is it'll take as long as it takes for them to talk, and as long as the public will kind of stomach the ongoing uncertainty. The biggest constraint here is kind of political culture. People want a government. That's what's likely to put a time limit on it.
So, explain to us what the Governor-General's role is during this time and who decides to call time on negotiations, who calls, well, no deal.
Yeah, so the Governor-General's role is to sit and wait. The Governor-General has no active role. What the Governor-General looks for is public announcements from the parties that they have reached an agreement which will create a majority in Parliament. So she's just looking to see, will parties publicly state they will work together in a government that gives 61 MPs, or at least a majority, more MPs supporting the government than will oppose it. And when she hears that, she will then appoint the leader of that group of parties, the Prime Minister. If this process carries on and the negotiations just don't appear to be working, the actual way a new election is held is that the caretaker Prime Minister, the person who remains in office, Chris Hipkins, running the country on a day-to-day basis, just basically keeping the lights on, keeping the power going, he is one who actually goes to the Governor-General and says, this isn't going to work, there needs to be a new election. But that caretaker Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, could only do it if a majority of MPs, the parties with a majority, say there needs to be a new election. He can't do it off his own bat. He can only reflect the will of Parliament.
So, part of the Governor-General's role is to ascertain where the confidence of the House lies. What does that mean, Andrew?
Fancy way of saying, is there more people support a government than oppose it? The confidence of the House simply means that if there's a vote of confidence, more people will support that vote of confidence than will oppose confidence. If the Governor-General is happy that, yep, that situation exists, they will appoint a government on that basis.
So if, and it's a big if nobody can form a deal and there is a decision that it's time to go back to the polls, the time frame for that is dictated by what, Andrew? Who sets the date for the next merry-go-round?
The Governor-General does on the advice of the caretaker Prime Minister. It gets very complicated because there's the mix of certain legal requirements, deadlines in the Electoral Act that have to be adhered to. But more importantly, the Electoral Commission practically would have to be able to get all the machinery up and running again. I mean, remember, an election involves literally tens of thousands of people being hired to run the thing, thousands of polling stations around the country. All of those would have to be found, they would have to be staffed, all that machinery would have to be able to be put in place. Back in 2002, which is the last time we had a kind of unscheduled election that happened very quickly, there was a 46-day gap between the election being called, the election date being announced, and the actual election. It'd be hard to see how you could do it any quicker than that. So at least, a month and a half before you get to vote, after you decide you have to go back to the polls.
And Andrew, to put this all in perspective, please, how many times has New Zealand had a hung parliament?
A hung parliament? Well, we haven't. We've certainly had situations where, and under MMP, okay, let me go back. I think we've all got a little bit sort of unsettled by the fact that for the last 3 years we've had a one-party majority government. And we've forgotten that under MMP, every government has technically been a minority because they've all been in coalition and arrangements. So this is nothing unusual. This is how MMP works. Things have just got a little bit more uncertain and fractious because the parties that look like they might have to do a deal are sort of arguing with each other. But this is MMP. This is how it works.
Patchwork quilt, start sewing. Thank you, Andrew. That is Otago University Law Professor Andrew Geddes there. It is 7 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A Melbourne bakery is thinking outside the square, the custard square that is, and to use a culinary term, it's causing a stir. Apparently the uneducated masses, moi included, have been cutting up these delicious slabs of gooey goodness in completely the wrong way our whole lives, resulting in a squishy mess. Well, helpfully, the Ferguson Player Bakehouse has produced a social media video, to show us the right way, and it has gone off. So we called CEO Steve Player for some expert advice. First off, well, you bloody Aussies really know how to fire up a controversy, don't you?
Well, we didn't try to, but we're happy to be in the middle of it, yeah.
So tell me, before we get to the nitty-gritty, how many people have viewed this video, please?
I have viewed this video. I think we're at 2.2 million.
Say again?
2.2 million.
Wow, who could have imagined there was such interest in how to cut a vanilla slice?
This is true. It was a real surprise.
Okay, let's start from the beginning then, because how do most of us cut? We call it a custard square also, so I have to call you out on that a little bit. We call it a custard square. So how do most people cut up a custard square, and what goes wrong, please?
Well, I think, and I can demo it for you if you would like, because I think everyone knows the way that it goes. I've got enough that I can destroy some.
Okay, let's do this.
Everyone cuts one like they cut a cake, which is straight down the middle, and they just hope it's going to pull through. But as we all know, what do we call it? A custard square.
Yep.
Is that right?
So you've got it there in front of you. You've got a good sharp bread knife, is it there? You know?
Pretty sharp knife pretty much goes like...
straight through. Yeah.
That.
Okay.
Yeah. Butterflies out. Pretty, not fun.
Yeah, and it tends to ooze, doesn't it, Steve, out the sides. When you go down through the icing and through the layers, you get a bit of custard ooze and it turns into a bit of a boggy mess. Yes, so the reality of this situation is that we should do what, please? What do we need to do to have a nice, clean slice through a custard square? And this is the content of your video. Demonstrate, please.
After cutting many.
So just pause, because we just want to soak up the moment. You have turned the custard square on its side so that the icing is no longer on top. The icing is facing towards me, and what you have got is an exposed side of custard facing you, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. This seems very counterintuitive, but carry on.
Two lovely structures of pastry to stop the collapsing, and...
cutting now. And it's like you sliced through butter.
It is like butter.
And describe how the edges that you've not got even the slightest bit of oozing custard coming out the sides, have you?
No, they are perfect. In fact, good enough knife, you can get them into 4. But most people say to me, what on earth are you doing cutting your vanilla slice in half? Why don't you surely you're eating the whole thing yourself. But
absolutely. But can we put it to the test, please? Because you've cut it in half. Okay. Could you please turn one of those halves onto its side as you would cut it and see if you can actually make it happen to go into quarters?
Let's go to this. Pretty good.
How did you work this out? How did you work it out?
I don't like cleaning up the kitchen bench or the workbench. And it's funny, I was in New Zealand only about a month ago visiting some bakeries, and there was this beautiful, French puff dusted vanilla slice being shared by two people, and of course it just got obliterated. And I should have just imposed myself on them and showed them how.
Could you have imagined that this video would have got so many views that people would be so fascinated by something seemingly so simple?
No, but they're the best ones, aren't they? I mean, I really thought, I know it's a Kiwi and an Aussie thing, but so many people from overseas, must be expats, UK as well. Lots of people in the UK who like this style of product. So no, it has been a surprise, but very pleased that we're helping some people out.
Have you got any other bakery secrets that you can let us in on, please, that have been, has anything else touched the sides of this video about custard squares?
Cutting a birthday cake, most people do the wedge thing and you're not sure what to do with what's left over. That's a whole different video, the way that I would cut a birthday cake, pull a bit of the side off, cut it. I need another video for that. But yeah, that would be the only thing that I think of.
Do you realise that you're calling that particular cake or slice, whatever you want to call it, by the wrong name?
Oh, yeah, no, well, I figured you'd say that. I mean, have you heard us call it a snot block here in Australia?
No!
Not my preferred choice, but if you walked into any good bakery in Australia and asked for a snot block, they'd give you a very nice vanilla slice. Anyway.
And I've got to say, is that because of the consistency?
Oh, I promised myself I wouldn't mention snot block. Now I'm going to wreck it all. It has to be, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, Lordy. Okay, that was Ferguson-Blair Bakehouse CEO Steve Blair. That is what they call the custard square in Australia. They've also done a video on how to put sprinkles on a cake, and that has been viewed, wait for it, 140 million times. Sprinkles on a cake. Is there a hard way to do that? One wonders. Anyway, I might have to check it out for the tips. Let's get to some feedback. Oh, Andre's got in touch and says, OMG, I am 59 and I've been doing this my whole life. Andre, well, we're happy to help. Roll it onto its side. Much better outcome. Someone else said they had been we've been cutting custard squares on their sides for 30 years. Well, you are above and beyond with your knowledge. The other person says the real question is how he cut up the whole slice into the serves. Why would you bother? You just eat the whole thing yourself, don't you? Or is that being piggy? I'm not sure. And someone else says, well, they're with me. Everybody knows you don't cut a custard square. Right? No, you don't. Evie, do you like custard squares?
Not really, no.
Oh, okay,
not a fan.
Then. Not a fan. All right.
Maybe it's the pastry.
Maybe the sprinkles video will be the one for you.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Paul Mardier, good evening. I'm Evie Ashton. The United Nations says 123,000 Palestinians have been displaced by retaliatory Israeli airstrikes into the Gaza Strip. More than 1,100 people have been killed on both sides after the massive attack by Hamas on Israel that started on Saturday. 36 hours after the latest hostilities began, rockets were still being fired from Gaza into southern Israel. Meanwhile, an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council has ended in New York without a unified statement over the crisis. Held behind closed doors, the 15-member council met to discuss the unfolding violence. Our correspondent Jody Jacobs reports.
There was no surprise that there was no unified statement from the UN Security Council, which has been divided on the situation in the Middle East for years now. However, according to some diplomats who spoke to reporters after the meeting had adjourned, there was widespread condemnation within the chamber against the violence. Council members laid particular emphasis on the protection of civilians on both sides of the conflict. The UAE's ambassador to the UN says while there might not be a unified statement from the Council today, they are expecting the Council will meet again in the coming days. Lana Nasabeh says this is a complex situation and her country has called for calm and a de-escalation of the violence.
A hung parliament is not former Prime Minister Jim Bolger's prediction for election day. The National Party warns there could be a second election needed if forming a coalition with New Zealand First proves too difficult. Polling suggests National and ACT would need Winston Peters' party to make a government. Back in 1996, Jim Bolger formed the country's first MMP government with New Zealand First, despite a fractious relationship. He told Checkpoint it comes down to talking.
Winston is smart, he's experienced, and he will test the parameters of the discussion. I mean, the fact is he stayed with the team we put together. He never caused it to fall apart. So while we took a while to bring the coalition together, but once we were together, there were no particular issues.
A by-election will be held in the electorate of Port Waikato following the death of ACT's candidate Neil Christensen. It means the next term of Parliament will have one more seat than usual. Political reporter Giles Dexter explains.
The Electoral Commission says party votes in the electorate will be counted in the general election results, but electorate votes will not count. The election results will still be based on a 120-seat parliament, but with 71 electorate MPs rather than 72 and 49 list MPs instead of 48. The by-election will increase the size of parliament to 121 seats. The Port Waikato electorate was most recently held by Nationals' Andrew Bailey, who is ranked 16th on the list and is standing again. The date of the by-election will be set by the Prime Minister.
Hospitals have been forced to roster on extra staff in emergency departments and in acute mental health teams during the 24-hour strike by telehealth workers. About 300 members of the nurses' organisation and the PSA employed by the telehealth service Whakarongoro hung up their phones at 5 o'clock last night. The strike has now ended. Whakarongoro says most of its 35 services, including Healthline, the Poison Centre and mental health crisis support, were available but with reduced staffing. Lawyers acting for the Jehovah's Witnesses Church dominated the first day of a judicial review, arguing it should be exempt from inclusion in the abuse and care inquiry. The church told the High Court in Wellington it doesn't operate institutions that take children, young persons or vulnerable adults into care. Bill Hickman was in court.
The church's lawyers are seeking to draw a line between abuse occurring among members of the church and the opportunity for abuse created by the church taking people into care. Lawyer Sarah Jerubine used an example of a 13-year-old girl abused by an elder while on a family holiday as being beyond the inquiry's scope because it occurred in a family setting. An advocate for abuse survivors said the stance was the same rhetoric offered by the church countless times.
Hundreds of people may have been exposed to measles, with 11 places now linked to a Northland teenager who attended a week-long theatre event in Wellington. Participants then dispersed to various parts of the country, and the infected Northlander caught a Jetstar flight to Auckland on Tuesday. The Chief Medical Officer for Te Akawhaiora Māori Health Authority, Dr. Dawiri McCree-Jansen, told Midday Report that historical gaps in vaccination coverage for those aged 15 to 30 have been further exacerbated by COVID.
It's sort of fallen off the cliff, really, during the COVID times, and we're building it back up. But, you know, when there's a measles case, it's just a reminder to us all to do everything we can to make sure that we're protecting babies and, you know, protecting communities.
Dr. McCree-Jansen says public health officials are encouraging people to get vaccinated against measles if they're not sure they're immune. The United Nations and aid organisations have started rushing supplies into Afghanistan after a major earthquake struck in the west of the country. The Taliban government says the death toll could be more than 2,000, with 1,200 people injured. The ABC's Avani Diaz reports.
The Taliban says rescue teams have been sent to the disaster zone in western Afghanistan near the city of Herat. Two 6.3 magnitude earthquakes hit the region, which were followed by several tremors. Houses in villages were destroyed, burying families inside. Medical facilities are overrun as rescue teams search the rubble for survivors.
And police are now looking into animal cruelty at Otago University, where students are said to have mistreated a live eel as part of an initiation ritual. The university has also been investigating claims students had bitten the legs off ducks, but says it has yet to find evidence of that. Students who are found to have committed serious offences risk being excluded. That's the news.
Pacific Waves.
Bringing Kiribati back into the forum.
Diving into the big stories of the region.
They are an instrument of the Constitution of Fiji.
And shining a light on issues affecting Pacific peoples in Aotearoa and around the world.
Being able to go out into different places and areas that share special connections with our community was really special.
We tala noa to Pacific leaders, newsmakers, experts and commentators, and bring you up-to-date coverage from our dedicated RNZ Pacific team and talented correspondents on the ground in the region. Pacific Waves at 8:15 weeknights on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint right now. The short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. In the west, from Northland to Manawatu, also Coromandel and Taihape, cloudy periods. A few showers north of Waikato spreading elsewhere this afternoon. Fine weather for Bay of Plenty and Taupo. From Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Horowhenua to Wellington. Mainly fine today, showers developing tomorrow afternoon and evening, some possibly heavy. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine today. Isolated showers developing tomorrow afternoon, becoming widespread and possibly heavy in Canterbury and Marlborough. Bulla and Westland, a few showers, clearing from southern Westland early tomorrow morning and elsewhere in the afternoon. North and central Otago, also Queenstown Lakes, fine, but a few showers for Queenstown Lakes this evening. Areas of frost tomorrow morning. Dunedin, Clutha, Southland and Fiordland, showers becoming isolated tomorrow evening. And Dekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. Showers developing tomorrow morning. It is 8 minutes past 6. Our next news headlines are at 6:30.
Thank you, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The death of a candidate in the Port Waikato electorate race means the district will face a by-election. ACT candidate Neil Christensen has died, with advance voting already underway. Meanwhile, the Electoral Commission says almost everyone should now have their easy vote cards after some initial delays that prompted criticism. Well, joining us now is the Chief Electoral Officer, Carl Lacane. Kia ora, Carl.
Kia ora, Lisa.
If we can start with the sad news of the death of a candidate, can you explain what happens now, please?
Yeah, look, our thoughts are with the family of Mr. Christensen. It's not a great time for them. Look, so what happens now is voting for the electorate candidate in that electorate won't be counted, but people's votes for the party vote will be counted. So our message to the voters there is, if you've already voted, you don't need to do anything. But if you haven't yet, please go out and vote, and just understand that we will count your party vote on the night, and we'll publish those results, and we'll count those in the official count following the election. And then there'll be a by-election to elect an MP for that electorate.
And what difference will this make to the balance in Parliament in terms of numbers?
So when we get the official results from the general election, we have to fill 120 MP seats. And so we'll take the people who get the most votes in 71 of the electorates, less the Port Waikato one, and then fill the rest from the party lists. And this is what we're required to do. And then when the by-election's done and we know the successful candidate there, they'll become the 121st MP in that parliament.
Without wanting to complicate things further, what would happen if you have kind of an overhang situation post the polls closing on election night? Does that mean you get another one on top of that, MP?
Oh, we're still looking into that. That's not something I can give a really informed comment on now.
So unknown at this stage what could potentially happen with that?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Advance voting, how is that tracking, please?
Advance voting is slightly above 217. It's not tracking at the same level as 2020, but we think it's returned back to the regular pattern of voting. whereas in 2020 we really encouraged people to go and vote early more strongly than we are now. That was part of the COVID-19 measures, just to spread people out.
So how many people have voted so far, approximately?
Approximately 600,000 people have cast ordinary votes at this stage.
And tell me, when do you start counting those votes? Because people will be anxious for results once the polls close on Saturday evenings. So how many votes do you count in advance?
So we can start counting the advance votes on Saturday from 9 a.m. and our teams will just work through those, and then from 7 p.m. we'll start publishing the results, plus counting the preliminary count of votes cast on that day.
So will those advance vote results almost come out instantaneously at the close of polls then, Carl?
They can do. It's not long after 7 p.m. they start coming through.
Okay. What is the latest with the easy vote packs? How many people have them, and are any still waiting?
Most people will have their easy vote packs. There were the 3 electorates that we decided to reprint them to make sure they had accurate information in them. And they were out for delivery on Friday last week, and they should all be delivered through by Wednesday this week.
So how did that mistake happen with the contents?
Look, we're not quite sure. We know one of our printers had, we think, put some of the electorate candidate information in the wrong box, and they got assembled into the packs, and then our quality control checks just at the end before they're posted out identified a couple. And so we had to make a decision then, and we decided it would be better for the voters to have accurate information about the candidates and their electorate. So we
Carl,
reprinted them all.
Just to be clear, human error or technical error?
Look, we're still trying to get to the bottom of that. Our priority had been to get them reprinted and out, so we'll be looking into that.
Do you think you've done well enough? I mean, some politicians have said you've got one job.
Look, we're just focused on delivering the selection, getting through this week, getting the preliminary count out, and then the official count. That's what our focus is on at the moment.
Right, and so you will have a mop-up into things that potentially fell short of what expectations might be.
We always do a review of how things went, and we're actually required to report to Parliament, and then Select Committee will inquire into how the election went and delivery. So we're expecting to cover the easy vote matter off in that report.
Thank you for your time this evening. That is the Chief Electoral Officer, Carl Lacane. The number of dead from the conflict between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas has risen to more than 1,000. Authorities in Israel say more than 700 people have died since the militants stormed into Israeli territory. Israel has been responding with a series of airstrikes, and authorities in Gaza say at least 400 people have died there. While most Western leaders have strongly backed Israel in the conflict, protests supporting the Palestinian cause have taken place across the world, including in the United States. The ABC's Carrington Clark reports.
Palestine will be free!
In the streets of New York, a group of protesters chant their support for the Palestinian cause. Other similar protests have been held across the world, including in Jordan, Morocco, Pakistan and Turkey. The Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said he was determined to ramp up diplomatic efforts to calm the fighting between Israeli and Palestinian forces.
As we've always said, maintaining the two-state solution is of the utmost importance. Creating an independent and geographically intact state of Palestine based on the 1967 borders with its capital Jerusalem is a necessity that can no longer be delayed.
Western governments have been almost unanimous in their support of Israel, with many lighting up major landmarks like the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin and Empire State Building in New York in the colours of Israel's flag, blue and white, in solidarity. The United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken told American ABC that although there is no evidence linking outside actors to the attack by Hamas, he believes it might be designed to destabilise attempts to normalise relations between Israel and some Arab states.
No surprise that those opposed to the efforts to normalise relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and more broadly, to normalise Israel's relations with countries throughout the region and beyond, who opposes it? Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran. So to the extent that this was designed to try to derail the efforts that were being made, that speaks volumes.
The United States is the biggest supplier of military aid to Israel and has pledged more. It's also expected to move military ships and aircraft closer to Israel as a show of support. The United Nations Security Council is meeting today to discuss the situation, but there is a divide between the 5 permanent members. While the US, UK and France have all strongly condemned the attack on Israel, Russia and China have called for restraint from both sides.
And Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta has faced criticism over a delay in her condemnation of the militant group Hamas's deadly attack on Israel. The Minister joins us now. Kia ora, Minister.
Kia ora.
Were you out of step with the international community in your response?
Look, I acknowledge that stronger language could have been used, and we've since clarified our position and condemn unequivocally the Hamas attacks.
Why didn't you use stronger language to begin with?
Well, it's a quickly escalating situation, sadly. Lives have been lost, and as soon as we could, I clarified the position with the strongest possible condemnation of the Hamas attack.
How do you think that looks for New Zealand? I mean, you put out your first message on social media. You didn't come out with the stronger language for another 7.5 hours. In the meantime, the Prime Minister had come out strongly, but not you as the Foreign Minister. How do you think that looks internationally?
Well, the Prime Minister was on the campaign trail, and as soon as we could clarify the position, we did, and we are on the same page. Civilian lives have been lost, sadly, and we need to find ways to try and work with the international community to de-escalate the situation.
So, Minister, just for clarity's sake now, how would you characterise this attack? Is it a terrorist attack?
The attack has been conducted by Hamas. It's a terror on the people of Israel. And again, we've condemned unequivocally the attack.
Right. So is it a terrorist attack on innocent individuals?
As I said, we've condemned unequivocally the recent terror attack of Hamas on Israel. And we are certain that the significance of lives lost will mean that people are living in fear in Israel, in West Bank and in Gaza. The events have escalated very quickly, and we need to work alongside the international community to figure out how do we de-escalate the situation. So diplomacy will continue to be required in this instance.
Minister, there seems to be a really high level of sophistication in this attack. What does that tell you about assistance that Hamas may have had and where that assistance came from?
Yeah, look, I can't say conclusively where the assistance has come from, but the fact that it was conducted in almost in a way that was quite alarming and by surprise, as reports would have it, it is a matter of concern, and we continue to be updated in terms of the information available to us. People have been abducted. It's a very, very tragic set of circumstances. Lives have been lost. Civilian lives have been lost.
Have you seen any intelligence, or has it been indicated to you that Iran is involved?
Look, there's been reported information, but as I say, we continue to be updated on the situation.
Updated from who, Minister? Who's
from our ministry? From our ministry.
And have you spoken to your Israeli counterpart?
No, not as yet. Not as yet. They will be very much focused on events there. The Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, has been in contact with the Australian Prime Minister, and I've certainly reached out to my Australian counterpart so that we are on the same page. And again, because people have been abducted, lives have been lost, the international community, as a result of the Security Council meeting, will be assessing what level of humanitarian support is required. We are in step with others, considering what do we do, because the situation must be de-escalated.
Yeah, and what do we do? Because as you have identified several times, there are tens of hostages and they come from a number of different countries and they will be in the forefront of people's minds. So what can New Zealand do? What should we do?
Well, we should be doing as we are, which is reaching out to our close friends and neighbours. We should be ensuring that we are getting current information from Israel, from the UN, around what steps we can take, and that's, in fact, that's the approach we take. We did the same thing when it came to the Russia-Ukraine situation, and we continue to work in the same manner.
What are your expectations around the United Nations? Because many people don't have very high expectations.
Well, I expect that we will try and find a way to respond to the immediate need, which is the huge loss of civilian life. I've commissioned a report from the Ministry to ask what humanitarian support, if any, can we provide, working alongside other international partners. And those are logical sequencing of steps that we should take in the areas that we can help.
Thank you for your time this evening. That is Foreign Minister Nanaia Mahuta there. 22 minutes after 6, and you were Checkpoint on RNZ National. Telehealth workers have just finished a 24-hour strike, their second in a month, after union members voted on Friday to reject the latest pay offer from their employer. The telehealth service Whakarongorau, which runs Healthline, GP After Hours, the Poison Centre, Mental Health Crisis Support and other services, says it wants to pay its staff more but needs more government funding. Ruth Hill reports.
With GP appointments in short supply and emergency departments overflowing, people needing urgent health advice are increasingly being told to ring a helpline. Joy, who lives on the Kapiti coast, was isolating at home with COVID a few weeks ago when her face went numb and she started losing feeling down one side of her body. Fearing she was having a stroke, she decided to call Healthline.
There was a message that said there was a 60-minute wait time, I'll be in a queue, and then we had about 4 lovely songs on rotation while I was waiting. It switched around, like it kind of would go 60 minutes and then you'd be, your wait time is 5 minutes. Your wait time is 60 minutes.
Joy ended up waiting well over an hour for her call to be answered, by which point the feeling had started to return to her face and arm.
When I finally got through to someone, they were actually amazing and, apologised for the wait, of course, and just really helpful, really thorough. Yes, so that was great, and I sort of felt reassured.
In the year to June, there were 2.2 million calls to the 35-plus helplines run by Whakarongorau, which is jointly owned by ProCare and Pegasus Health. Mental health nurse and PSA delegate Jane Macquarie says many of her telehealth colleagues are quitting.
Not able to, live properly on the wages paid, with high levels of sickness, with rosters being difficult to fill. Shifts are often left short-staffed, increasing the stress on the workers on duty. With all this going on, we're seeing increased wait times.
Nurses Organisation delegate Bruce Tomlinson says the latest offer of a 3.75% pay rise following mediation talks after the first strike last month isn't good enough.
When comparing it with other organisations that have had pay rises recently, like the senior doctors and dental workers, they settled with a 7% pay rise.
Bruce Tomlinson says that's particularly galling when Whakarongorau returned a surplus of $7 million last financial year. Whakarongorau's spokesperson, Anna Campbell, says surpluses are reinvested, most recently on upgrading IT and call management systems, developing new programs and staff training. In a written statement, she agrees it's unfair that telehealth nurses are paid less than those working in hospitals, which is why Whakarongorau has joined forces with other providers to lobby the government.
While the recent historic pay equity settlement for Te Whatu Ora nurses and healthcare workers is great, it has created a stark pay gap with those working in primary and community care and telehealth.
Most helplines were available during the strike, but with reduced staffing and priority given to services supporting people in immediate danger. Te Whatu Ora, which funds the service, along with the Ministry of Social Development, ACC and Corrections, says during the strike it boosted staffing levels at emergency departments and some acute mental health teams. There's no date yet set for further talks.
A new low-carbon stormwater pipe being installed today at the site of a sinkhole in central Auckland will be the first of its kind in New Zealand. In July, a 2.5 metre wide sinkhole appeared on College Hill after a stormwater pipe burst beneath the busy thoroughfare. It's just one of a string of recent issues with Auckland's ageing water network. It's hoped the new pipes will help to reduce the city's carbon footprint while also preventing future problems. Lucy Sear reports.
The gaping sinkhole in Freeman's Bay is among over 30 to have appeared in the city since the weather events earlier this year. Today, Auckland Council contractors began laying so-called low-carbon pipes at the site. These, the council says, are made of leftover manufacturing materials and are responsible for 22% less emissions than traditional concrete pipes. With concrete being one of the greatest contributors to Auckland Council's carbon footprint, Healthy Waters General Manager Craig McIlroy says this could have a significant impact.
I think at the moment we're looking at 22% carbon reduction for these pipes, but with the more slag you could go even further.
The $2.86 million College Hill project will see 300 metres of pipe laid from Beaumont Street and Victoria Street West to England Street. Mr McIlroy says it removes 4.4 tonnes of carbon. Josh Satyaga is a manufacturing manager for the company that makes the pipes, Heinz. He says the emission reduction is achieved through the materials the pipes are made from and their design.
So using cementitious products, fillers, to produce a lower carbon footprint, as well as sourcing some of our materials, so the aggregate and steel from suppliers that are on the same journey in terms of their sustainability framework.
Meanwhile, businesses in the area who've already dealt with months of traffic controls are frustrated that the project will take until late December to finish. Tony Chase, the owner of a motorcycle gear store on College Hill, says they've been impacted for most of the year.
We're not overjoyed because we've got more disruption in the busiest time of the year. You know, we're a seasonal business, so we rely on our summer trade and going up into Christmas.
Harry Williams, the manager of a streetwear store nearby, feels the same.
It's been all year. It's been really slow, and I think it's kind of blocking up everything for the whole city. It's probably one of the main streets that people travel through.
Mr Williams says their basement was flooded in the January floods and they lost about $100,000 worth of stock. Contractor Tim McIntosh says the most challenging part of the project is now completed and he hopes traffic congestion will ease soon.
As we progress up the hill, we'll be getting away from the busier intersection and hopefully causing less disruption.
Wastewater pipes in Auckland also require significant repairs, and Watercare's board will tomorrow meet to discuss a $3.5 billion program to replace the ageing infrastructure.
All right, some of your thoughts before we head off on potential coalitions and the suggestion that we might have to go to the polls again. This person says, sounds like kindergarten and primary school playgrounds. If you won't play by my rules, then we won't play. Really? All this speculation about a hung parliament is simply that. This listener says, speculation, all based on polls, which are notoriously incorrect. It is ridiculous. Someone else says, has Luxon snatched defeat from the jaws of victory? Oh, and this one. Where would Winston be without the media? Anyone would think we're about to see a second coming this weekend. Is it a second coming? If he's back, will it be the third time he's bounced back? I don't know, I have to do my maths. That's about all from us. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the evening. If you missed anything, you can find us on Spotify and Apple. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, talks to a Kiwi hoping to set a world record by making 800 bungee jumps from Auckland's Harbour Bridge. That'd give you a headache, wouldn't it? Or at least the spins. 5 a.m. tomorrow morning.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. Tēnā tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. A New Zealander in Tel Aviv has described rockets raining down. Israel has declared war on Hamas after the militant group's attack on Saturday. Jordan Grimmer told Checkpoint there's about a minute between the alarm sounding and explosions. A 36-year-old man has been charged after allegedly dressing up in a nurse's uniform to get into Christchurch Hospital in order to steal. Former Prime Minister Jim Bolger says he doesn't think the election will end in a hung parliament. National has suggested they may not be able to form a deal with New Zealand First. Polling suggests National and ACT would need Winston Peters' party to make a government. And a major earthquake in the west of Afghanistan is feared to have killed more than 2,000 people. The United Nations and aid organisations have started rushing supplies to the area. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7 o'clock.
WOMAD, the World's Festival 2023, is a program bringing you live concert recordings from an incredible array of international and local musicians playing at the beautiful Bowl of Brooklyn's New Plymouth. It's music from the world, for the world, all impeccably recorded by our RNZ recording team. Tune in to WOMAD, the World's Festival 2023, every Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. and again on Wednesday after 11 p.m. on nights on RNZ National. It's just like being there.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. You are listening to RNZ National and you're with me, Evie Ashton, on Trending Now through to 7 o'clock. Nisa Bulavanaka. We begin with the detail. Air pollution is the invisible